In April 2009, a crisis unfolded off the Horn of Africa that would place America's elite special operations forces at the center of international attention.
Pirates took the ship and kidnapped Captain Richard Phillips.
A U.S.-flagged cargo ship, the Maersk Alabama, was hijacked by Somali pirates approximately 240 nautical miles southeast of Isle. Though the ship's crew managed to retake control, the pirates escaped with the ship's captain, Richard Phillips, taking him hostage aboard a small covered lifeboat. It was a volatile situation playing out in international waters, and it demanded the involvement of the most capable special operations force the U.S. could deploy. That force was the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6. From the very beginning, this rescue mission involved three distinct elements within the unit, each with its own responsibilities and specialized capabilities: Gold Squadron, Red Squadron, and Gray Squadron. Together, these squadrons would converge on the Indian Ocean in a layered and rapidly evolving mission that demanded strategic flexibility, long-range logistics, and surgical precision. Gold Squadron was first on the scene. They had already been forward deployed in East Africa for other regional operations and were in proximity when the hijacking occurred. Their orders were clear: intercept the developing situation immediately, stabilize it, and prevent the pirates from reaching the Somali coast with the hostage. A small team from Gold Squadron, inserted via C-17 aircraft, conducting a night parachute jump into the Indian Ocean. With no backup and limited visibility, they landed in the water near the USS Bainbridge, the Navy destroyer already shadowing the lifeboat, and were recovered on board. Once aboard the Bainbridge, Gold Squadron immediately assumed command of tactical oversight. Their task was not to rescue the hostage yet, but to maintain pressure on the pirates and contain the situation at sea. They advised the ship's crew, coordinated standoff tactics, and gathered intelligence on the pirates' behavior and capabilities. Their efforts included using rotor wash from helicopters to disrupt the pirates' comfort and steering the Bainbridge in such a way that it created disorienting waves. Gold Squadron also conducted a form of close-in deception, approaching the lifeboat in disguised RIBS rigid inflatable boats, offering water and supplies under the guise of being Navy crew. This allowed them to assess the condition of the hostage and collect visual confirmation of pirate positions without escalating the confrontation. While Gold Squadron was already on station managing containment aboard the USS Bainbridge, a massive push was underway in the United States to get additional forces into the Indian Ocean quickly. The mission demanded more firepower, mobility, and technical support. Red Squadron, designated as the Direct Action Unit, and Gray Squadron, responsible for mobility and maritime transport, were activated together to deploy a heavy, flexible rescue package. What unfolded was one of the most complex and high-risk insertions SEAL Team 6 had ever attempted: a tandem squadron jump into open ocean in daylight with boats. Red Squadron was given just hours to assemble personnel, prepare gear, and load aircraft. The alert made it clear: an American hostage was being held at sea. This was the kind of crisis the command was built for. Over 100 members of Red Squadron were scrambled, along with boats, gear, and a carefully constructed manifest. Operators acted as loadmasters, juggling weight calculations, gear distribution, parachute counts, and emergency kits. The pressure was immense. The boats were overweight, manifest rosters had changed, and last-minute additions complicated the already tight schedule. The C-17 flight that followed carried not just Red Squadron's personnel, but their boats, and the entire jump was coordinated with Gray Squadron, who would operate those boats in the water. The boats included heavily modified rigid inflatable boats, RIBS, and larger high-speed crafts, fast, agile, and essential for navigating the open ocean with SEALs on board. These crafts were loaded with shock absorption gear, fuel supplies, and mobility kits needed for ship-to-ship and sea-to-land operations. Jumping in broad daylight over calm waters, the insertion was surgical but intense. From the rear ramp of the C-17, Gray Squadron's boats were deployed first. The release was powerful. The first boat dragged the second behind it by cable, pulling it down the fuselage before both were parachuted into the ocean. Following close behind were Red Squadron's operators, leaping from the aircraft with their own gear to land near the boats. The timing had to be perfect. Daylight made them visible, but it also allowed for better control of descent and landing. Operators steered canopies close to the parachuting boats, landing within reach of the watercraft and clambering aboard as fast as possible. Once in the boats, nerves gave way to action. Gray Squadron immediately took over boat operations, getting engines started and equipment configured. The RIBS and stealth boats were used to recover incoming SEALs from the water and head toward staging locations. A second pass dropped in the remainder of the task force. Some operators were even formally assigned into the unit. With the full squadron recovered and accounted for, the convoy of boats made its way to the USS Boxer, one of the supporting vessels in the operation. The boats were craned aboard and the SEALs were brought inside. Sailors on the ship had little idea who these heavily armed, bearded men in non-standard uniforms were. But space was cleared, and the operators were housed, fed, and prepped. Once staged, a portion of Red Squadron was immediately dispatched to the Bainbridge to begin surveillance and tactical coordination. The rest of the team continued rehearsals and planning aboard the Boxer. The mission wasn't about brute force, it was about adaptability. One plan involved amphibious insertion, swimming from small boats to the lifeboat if it drifted out of range. Multiple contingencies were built into the plan, and every operator was ready for rapid pivot. Gray Squadron, having delivered the boats and enabled the entire jump, remained an integral part of the mission. Their vessels were kept ready should a new phase of the rescue develop, including a scenario in which the hostage might be moved to land. They also facilitated short-range mobility, moving personnel between ships and preparing for possible fast insertion contingencies. This tandem jump, conducted in daylight over calm seas with full boat packages and support teams, was unprecedented in scale and precision. It showcased not only Red Squadron's lethal readiness, but Gray Squadron's unmatched maritime mobility. From the U.S. East Coast to the Somali Basin, they executed one of the boldest long-range insertions in special operations history. The staging was complete, the team was in place, and the final decision would soon be made. With the USS Bainbridge maintaining its vigil and SEALs Team 6 fully staged across naval platforms in the Indian Ocean, pressure mounted from every angle. The world was watching. The clock was ticking, and 3 squadrons, gold, red, and gray, were deep in the kind of tactical deliberation that only Tier 1 units can execute under such constraints. The objective was clear: rescue Captain Richard Phillips. But the route to that end was far from straightforward. In the closed, sweltering, and unpredictable lifeboat drifting behind the Bainbridge, 3 armed Somali pirates stood inches from their hostage. Any misstep would be fatal. What followed was a dynamic and adaptive planning process. While Red Squadron rehearsed action on objective procedures and sniper contingencies, and Gray Squadron coordinated full-spectrum ISR and communications, mission planners cycled through several possible courses of action. These weren't just hypothetical drills, they were real options, being weighed moment by moment as intelligence developed. One of the earliest concepts proposed was a beach-based interception. The pirates were at one point steering the lifeboat back toward the Somali coast. If they made landfall with the hostage, the rescue would shift from a maritime mission to a complex inland operation, risking prolonged captivity, political consequences, and a higher chance of mission compromise. So, a beach over the beach, OTB contingency was quietly prepared. SEALs from Red and Gray squadrons, supported by mobility specialists, readied for a scenario where they'd need to move ashore fast. Boats, beach charts, and helicopter support were prepped for a possible raid in Somalia itself. That option remained open as long as the pirates had control of the lifeboat's heading. But once the Bainbridge secured control of the lifeboat's tow line under the guise of drifting together for safety, the threat of a beach OTB raid began to fade. Still, the SEALs kept it in their back pocket, ready to pivot if needed. Another strategy explored was a top-down helicopter assault. The idea was to fly 2 helicopters low and fast over the lifeboat, fast rope SEALs onto the roof, breach the hatch, and overwhelm the pirates in seconds. The plan was bold, the kind that SEALs train for, but it also came with serious risk. The lifeboat was compact and closed and made of thick fiberglass. Firing into it without hitting the hostage was near impossible. One startled movement from a pirate, and the entire mission could end in tragedy. A third option involved underwater demolition. Navy SEALs, who trained for clandestine infiltration beneath ships, could swim to the lifeboat at night and rig shaped charges to disable the rudder or blow the hatch. This would create confusion or force the pirates to the surface, allowing for a strike. But again, the enclosed design of the lifeboat meant the shockwave could harm the hostage. Plus, the heat and lack of ventilation meant that any breach might provoke chaos rather than control. There was also a diversion and boarding tactic explored. SEALs in disguised boats such as RIBS and the more specialized craft brought in by Gray Squadron could deliver food, water, and supplies to lull the pirates into complacency. Once trust was gained, they could surge and breach the boat at close range. This approach had been partially attempted by Gold Squadron, who had earlier disguised themselves as Navy sailors and approached under the pretense of resupply. The intel gathered from that close contact proved invaluable, but the risk of triggering the pirates while halfway into a breach was deemed too great for a full-scale takedown attempt. As hours stretched into days, the task force found itself leaning toward an increasingly narrow solution: sniper precision. The plan would rely on the Bainbridge's tow the lifeboat to maintain a stable, predictable range, while Red Squadron's sniper teams rotated around the clock, studying every movement inside. With support from Gray Squadron's intelligence feeds, including UAVs and drones overhead, every second was documented. The goal? Identify a moment when all three pirates would be visible through portholes or the open hatch, and Captain Phillips could be confirmed clear of any trajectory. This approach was not just about marksmanship. It required restraint, discipline, and absolute timing. Every sniper had to know their target's posture, habits, and routines. They had to be confident their shot would be effective and that their teammates would fire within milliseconds. It wasn't one sniper, it was three, synced like a single machine. Meanwhile, negotiations continued. A breakthrough appeared when one pirate was lured onto the Bainbridge under the guise of diplomacy. The second he stepped off the lifeboat, he was detained. This shifted the equation. Now, only 3 pirates remained on board with the hostage. With fewer variables, the risk matrix became slightly more manageable. The strategy was set. No helicopter raid, no beach assault, no underwater demolition. The rescue would come not in the form of boots storming a hatch, but through the still crosshairs of trained snipers, each waiting for the perfect moment. All 3 squadrons now had their defined roles. Gold remained the stabilizing and containment force. Gray continued to monitor ISR and data relay. Red Squadron sat poised, rifles ready, nerves calm, and eyes fixed on their assigned targets. By Easter Sunday, the calm waters of the Indian Ocean had become the backdrop for one of the most calculated hostage rescues in modern special operations history. The tension on the USS Bainbridge was silent, but thick. Every breath, every signal, every shift on deck carried purpose. For days, Red Squadron snipers had taken turns behind their scopes, tracking the pirates' every move. They had logged the intervals when the pirates rotated positions, when they opened the hatch, and when they stood in line to speak to Captain Phillips. They had dialed their optics for wind, distance, and angle. Nothing was left to guesswork. The team aboard the Bainbridge had rehearsed dozens of variations of the mission, but it all came down to a few seconds and a narrow window of visibility. On the command and intelligence side, Gray Squadron remained fully engaged. Through drone feeds, satellite imaging, and constant communication links, they provided minute-by-minute updates. Were the pirates sleeping? Arguing? Moving too close to the hostage? Every bit of data informed whether the green light could be issued. Back in the lifeboat, the psychological pressure was mounting. The 3 remaining pirates were growing erratic. They had been promised safe passage, but the rescue vessels weren't backing down. One of them had been removed from the equation, already lured onto the Bainbridge and quietly detained. That shift had left a gap in the pirates' internal trust. Their sense of control was fading. From a sniper's point of view, the equation was still incomplete. Until all 3 targets were visible and Captain Phillips confirmed safe, there could be no trigger pull. For over 96 hours, the SEALs had waited, but Easter Sunday would deliver the moment they needed. As the sun hovered low on the horizon, shadows fell at the right angle. The lifeboat, still being slowly towed by the Bainbridge, rocked gently, no more than 75 feet behind the destroyer's stern. Inside, the pirates moved into position. One leaned into the hatch, barking instructions. Another stood midship. A third took a step toward the rear. At that precise moment, all 3 were exposed, each visible through a porthole or the open top hatch. Simultaneously, the spotters confirmed the hostage was slumped low and out of the line of fire. The silent command went through comms. 3 snipers, 3 shots. They didn't fire in unison, not exactly, but the timing was so tight, it may as well have been 1. Suppressed rifles cracked in rapid succession. The recoil was minimal. The impact was final. All 3 pirates dropped. Not one had time to move. Not one raised a weapon. Immediately, a Red Squadron breacher, already rigged and ready, fast roped down the tow line directly onto the lifeboat. Without hesitation, he breached the hatch and entered. Inside, he found Captain Richard Phillips hands bound, exhausted but alive. The confirmation was sent, hostage secure. Within minutes, Captain Phillips was transferred to the Bainbridge's deck, flanked by SEALs, medics, and Navy crew. The mission was complete. No casualties on the American side, 0 injuries to the hostage, every objective fulfilled. What followed wasn't celebration. It was execution of post-op protocol. Weapons were secured, bodies were processed. Intelligence material inside the lifeboat, from radios to documents, was logged by Gray Squadron and Navy analysts. The SEALs began their reset, cleaning weapons, repacking gear, submitting field reports. Back in the command center, mission logs were finalized and data transmissions continued to higher command. It was a Tier 1 finish, clean, clinical, exact. There were no photos, no interviews, no chest pounding. Even aboard the Bainbridge, the atmosphere remained reserved. The mission had demanded patience and control, not glory. Each squadron had played a role. Gold Squadron had stabilized the scene from the beginning, laying the groundwork in the first chaotic hours. Gray Squadron had provided the technical scaffolding linking surveillance, communication, and timing into one unified picture. Red Squadron had delivered the final precision, the shot, the breach, the recovery. It was a perfect triangulation of containment, intelligence, and action. Back home, the media would learn only fragments. SEAL snipers, pirates killed Nioistang, captain rescued. The public saw the ending. Few ever knew how many strategies were rehearsed, how many variables calculated, or how many decisions were made in the shadows before that ending could exist. What took place over that 5-day window in the Indian Ocean wasn't just a rescue. It was a validation of Tier 1 readiness, proof that when everything else is uncertain, this community can deliver. And they did. The rescue of Captain Richard Phillips wasn't just a successful operation, it became a defining moment in the modern history of American special operations. Long after the final shot was fired, the effects of that mission rippled outward, from the SEAL teams who executed it, to the Pentagon planners who studied it, to the maritime industry that reevaluated how it dealt with piracy on the high seas. In the immediate aftermath, very little was said publicly. There were no press conferences featuring operators, no details released about the identities of those involved. Internally, however, the operation was seen as a benchmark, a mission that had combined all the elements of Tier 1 capability: rapid deployment, inter-squadron integration, intelligence fusion, and absolute restraint under pressure. For naval special warfare, it was proof that forward-deployed squadrons could adapt to fast-moving, ambiguous crises and still maintain control. The coordination between Gold Squadron's containment and deception tactics, Gray Squadron's intelligence and logistics support, and Red Squadron's final kinetic action was a case study in how special operations forces should function seamlessly, silently, and without fanfare. The mission's success validated a key principle in special operations planning: build flexibility into the strategy. Multiple plans had been considered, rehearsed, and discarded. From fast rope insertions to underwater approaches, every option was studied, not just for tactical effect, but for risk to the hostage. What ultimately succeeded was not the most dramatic plan, but the most measured. It was a reminder that the most effective solution is often the one that leaves the fewest variables to chance. The rescue also reshaped how hostage rescue is approached in maritime environments. For years, piracy off the Horn of Africa had escalated. Shipping companies were unsure how far they could push security. After this operation, the message was clear. The United States had both the will and the means to resolve hostage situations decisively. Merchant fleets began implementing better emergency protocols. Naval task forces increased their patrols in high-risk areas. International cooperation around piracy threats became more robust. Within DEVGRU, the mission was integrated into training curriculums. Operators studied the details: how Gold Squadron first engaged the situation with limited support, how Red and Gray coordinated mid-ocean jump operations, how communications and ISR synced to create a complete battlespace picture. Not every mission would play out the same way, but the model was strong: layered pressure, deception, intelligence-driven containment, and precision strike capability. Operators who were there don't speak about the mission in terms of glory. They talk about the timing, the hours of waiting, the environmental factors, the communication across teams, and the silence that followed when the job was done. For them, this wasn't a movie plot. It was a moment where everything had to go exactly right. because failure meant death not just for the hostage but potentially for the entire team. When the film Captain Phillips was released in 2013, it brought the story into the public consciousness. Tom Hanks's portrayal of Phillips and the final dramatic scenes showing the rescue gave audiences a window into the stakes of the mission. But what the film didn't capture, what it couldn't capture, was the full complexity of what had unfolded behind the scenes. The movie showed the bullets. It didn't show the planning, the restraint, or the men in boats soaking wet, watching for hours through rifle scopes, waiting for a moment that might never come. The mission also affected broader U.S. military policy. It strengthened confidence in using special operations forces for high-risk, time-sensitive scenarios, especially in environments where conventional military force was too blunt a tool. It also led to deeper conversations about how to manage emerging threats like piracy, terrorism at sea, and transnational hostage networks. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the operation was the reminder that precision, discipline, and patience are sometimes more powerful than overwhelming force. This wasn't an assault on a compound. It was a sniper solution built on days of observation, inter-squadron coordination, and the understanding that sometimes the most heroic action is the one that never has to be seen. To this day, the operation is studied inside Tier 1 units not as an example of bravado, but of mastery. It showed that elite operators could operate across thousands of miles, from jump aircraft to warships in foreign waters under global scrutiny, and still remain invisible until the moment of execution. The hostage was saved, the pirates were eliminated, and no American lives were lost. It was, in every sense, a perfect mission.